What if the most powerful alliance in the galaxy didn't come from war, but from a single human heartbeat? A forgotten man is summoned by alien royalty not to fight, but to feel. Four princesses, born to rival stars, once mocked Earth's insignificance until their fates were tied to one man they couldn't understand, and couldn't ignore. In this story, you'll witness not just trials of mind and body but the tearing open of identity, memory, and truth. A palace that breathes thoughts. A trial that forces him to choose between betraying one or saving billions. And a moment when love and loyalty rise beyond genetics and protocol. But here's the question: can unity ever be forged without fear? Can trust truly reshape the stars? Stay until the end, because what begins as a galactic obligation becomes a story that could change the way we define evolution, love, and what it means to be human. In the smog-thick morning of Neo-Earth's second sunrise, where concrete towers floated between veils of electromagnetic haze, there stood a man that history had forgotten. No one remembered his name, because he had done nothing worthy of memory. That was precisely why they chose him. His apartment was a relic of old humanity: cracked tiles, analog switches, and a single potted plant clinging to life by the window. He lived alone, had no family left, and worked a monotonous job cataloging decaying satellites in Earth's orbital graveyard. The kind of life that didn't leave ripples. But that morning, as the artificial dawn bled through filtered glass, the silence broke. Not with a knock, not with a message, but with a shape. A light bent unnaturally in the corner of his room, humming like it was remembering something. And then came the map. It unfolded mid-air, three-dimensional, ancient, and alive. A floating cartographic sphere of systems no Earth telescope had ever seen, traced with golden constellations that pulsed like arteries. At its center, one word spiraled inward in an unknown language, except he understood it. Come. Not a command. A beckoning. A summons. The man, whose name we will learn in time, stood motionless. His heart, which had not raced in years, thudded against his ribs like it was trying to wake him from a lifetime of numbness. He reached out. The moment his finger grazed the glowing surface, the room folded in on itself. There was no tunnel. No light-speed jump. Just a moment of absence. And then he stood in a chamber not made of matter, but of memory. Before him, a council of beings that shimmered like distant stars behind a veil of oil and water. He couldn't count them. They weren't designed to be counted. Some had forms. Others suggested forms, like ideas made flesh. Time bent around their presence. "You are late," one of them said. Or rather, the thought was implanted, precise and cold. "I wasn't aware I was expected," he replied, surprising himself with the steadiness in his voice. The central being moved, or perhaps rotated through dimensions he could not perceive, and produced a cube of transparent obsidian. Within it, the crest of a species extinct before humanity discovered fire. "Your grandfather," the being continued, "was a custodian of balance. He forged the accord between the lineages. He died sealing the rift of seers with his blood, and by our laws, his legacy passes to you." The man's mind reeled. "My grandfather was a solar farmer in the Martian colonies." "No," came the reply. "He was that. And much more." The obsidian cube cracked open. 4 tendrils of iridescent light snaked into the air, forming symbols he could not read but somehow felt deep within his spinal cord. The council's voice grew layered, as if 1,000 minds now spoke in sync. "You are the inheritor of the bonded flame, the spiritual thread that connects 4 bloodlines across 4 worlds. Their progeny, daughters of genetic sovereignty and psychic dominion, are unbound. They require stabilization. You are the fulcrum. He tried to laugh. You're telling me I'm supposed to, what, marry aliens? The chamber pulsed. We are telling you, they replied, that the galaxy's axis has shifted. Without the fusion of Terran soul and Enteri flame, the resonance field collapses. The quadrant treaty dissolves. War returns. Your presence is not sentimental, it is structural. And then the cube shattered completely, releasing a sound that was not sound, a vibration that split his memories in two. He fell to his knees as a flood of inherited visions took him. He saw his grandfather, not old, not bent, but young, armored in light, standing on the edge of a dying moon. Before him stood the four houses of Illyrian, their banners whipping in the gravity storms. Behind him an artifact called the Chorus Engine, humming with the power to erase timelines. To end the war between the houses, his grandfather had offered himself as the silent bond. A neutral soul. Not of royal blood, but of sacred will. In doing so, he ended 1,000-year war. But peace has a price. In his final act, the old man encoded a living heirloom in Terran DNA, his own grandson, so that when the time came, the threads of unity would be rekindled, not by tradition, but by choice. And now, that choice had arrived. The man awoke on a floating platform orbiting a planet of crystal seas and aurora skies. The sky shimmered in unnatural hues, and as he struggled to stand, a figure approached, her robes woven from starlight itself. You've inherited what none of us expected, she said. Her voice echoed in his bloodstream. Who are you? He whispered. I am the keeper of legacies, she said. And you, Terran, are now bound to 4 legacies, and 4 destinies. He looked out at the planet below. 4 beams of light rose from 4 cities, each a capital of a different house. Each ruled by a daughter who held power not just over people, but over the very resonance of space-time. And somewhere, buried in their disdain and mystery, he would have to awaken not just diplomacy but connection. Because these daughters had never known humility. Never known loss. Never known what it meant to choose someone not because of blood but because of soul. And he had never been chosen for anything at all. Until now. The lift that carried him down was made of living metal, breathing softly like a slumbering beast. Its translucent walls shimmered with internal starlight, and through them, the entire capital city of Velth Auralis unfolded like a spiral carved from refracted crystal. Roads flowed between towers of light. Creatures of winged plasma drifted overhead. A symphony of resonance guided movement, voice, and emotion. Nothing here was silent. Even stillness had a hum. He stepped out into a hall of sentient geometry, floors that reacted to his bioelectric field, walls that shimmered based on his pulse. Ahead, a set of towering doors split open without sound, revealing the throne spiral, the sacred chamber where no species entered without binding intent. They were already there. 4 silhouettes backlit by streams of violet sunlight descending from the dome above. 4 beings who had been born not merely as royal bloodlines, but as anchors of force. Each one was bred, trained, and tuned to govern a quadrant of galactic resonance, and now by some incomprehensible legacy clause they were expected to bond with a human. They turned. The eldest moved first, her steps calculated, each motion forged through centuries of ceremonial grace. Her presence was sharp like frozen starlight. Her voice did not echo, it etched itself into the air. So, she said, this is the anomaly. Her name was not spoken aloud, not yet. But her presence declared authority. She wore a mantle that shimmered in 4-dimensional folds, shifting with time signatures the human eye could barely register. She was logic incarnate. He bowed not out of obligation, but instinct. She didn't smile. Instead, she studied him like a flawed equation. Beside her, the second daughter stepped forward. Unlike her sister, she moved like wind bending around architecture, graceful, fluid, adaptive. Her eyes glinted with quiet mockery, as if this entire event were a form of art that amused her. She tilted her head. Your fashion is quaint. Is all Earth culture this synthetic? She wore strands of magnetic silk that followed the emotional pulse of the room. Her fingers carried residual paint from the thought canvas she had been interrupted from. She was an archivist of feeling, a sculptor of unseen memory. The third did not approach. She prowled instead. Circular steps. Eyes sharp. Hair like molten silver refracted through a predator's mind. She sized him not as a man but as prey. Her words cut before her lips moved. I can smell uncertainty. It stains you. You are soft, terrestrial. Why are you here? She was bred for strategy and war. Her gestures were as economical as a blade unsheathed. Her breath hinted of stardust and iron, and the silence around her was tactical, not emotional. The last of them didn't look at him right away. She stood with arms crossed, gaze aimed elsewhere, defiant in her posture. But there was a twitch in her fingers, an unrest in her stillness that betrayed curiosity. When she finally spoke, her voice dripped with scorn layered over something more dangerous: resentment. Do not mistake tradition for destiny, she said. We are not bound by his blood. We owe nothing to a corpse's will. And in that moment, the man realized, he wasn't meeting four sisters. He was stepping into a battlefield of four empires, each built from different ideologies. One governed by reason. One ruled by feeling. One led by force. And one, by rebellion. He was not a consort. He was the balancer of worlds. They circled him, not physically but intellectually, psychically. Their minds extended like networks of intent, brushing against his with layered thoughts. In Ehlerian tradition, communication was not limited to words. It was resonance, memory echoes, emotional timbre. His thoughts were not private here. They were ingredients in the assessment. Images flashed in his vision: a burning Earth city, a failed treaty, a Terran ambassador begging on his knees, the word primitive spoken in 17 dialects. And then, the council's choice. His face, chosen by ancestral legacy, imposed over a dying galaxy's map. You don't belong here, said the eldest, still calm. You weren't trained for this, said the second, amused. You'll collapse under pressure, said the third, almost bored. You're a placeholder, hissed the fourth. Nothing more. But he did not bow again. I wasn't chosen to impress you, he said evenly. I was chosen because someone believed this empire needs something you can't calculate, compose, conquer, or disobey. And what is that? The eldest asked, more curious than before. Perspective. The chamber paused. Even the floor beneath him recalibrated its energy field. He continued. You've spent lifetimes mastering your systems. But systems rot without challenge. My world has been broken, rebuilt, and broken again. We learned to adapt, not because we were designed to, but because we had no choice. Maybe that's what your father saw in us, in me. Not a perfect ruler, but a variable. He didn't flinch when the third daughter approached, stepping close enough that her breath nearly touched his cheek. Variables are dangerous. So are monarchies built on stasis, he whispered back. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't move away. Near the chamber's end, a bell tone struck from the dome above. It wasn't sound. It was gravity shifting for 1 second. A signal of transition. The spiral dais at the chamber's center began to rise. The keeper re-entered, accompanied by a projection of the galactic accord itself swirling laws encoded in anthropic runes. The reading began. The text confirmed it. By law, by legacy, by the union of old flame and human echo, this man now held guardian status over the spiral houses. The princesses did not bow. They did not agree. But they could not undo it. The keeper's voice faded with the words, "Let the first phase of resonance begin. You may now attempt, rapport." Each of the princesses turned away. They did not acknowledge him again that day. But in their silence, he heard more than he ever could through language. There were fractures among them. Competing visions of their father's will. An unease about the succession. Not about marriage or ritual but about control. And so the man finally understood. He was not stepping into a romantic farce. He was stepping into a civil war. And he was now the centerpiece of the board. The chamber of the first trial did not appear. It awakened. One moment, he was walking down a corridor of crystal veins that pulsed with bioluminescent rhythm, and the next, the walls receded, the floor fractured into an infinite spiral, and the air lost all temperature. Not warm. Not cold. Simply, unassigned. He was no longer in a palace, nor in a room, nor even within matter's rules. He stood at the core of something that had not been built, but remembered into being. At the center hovered an object. It was not quite a sphere, not quite a mirror, not quite alive, yet it pulsed with a rhythm that made his lungs forget their function. It turned slowly, not on any axis, but on choice reacting to indecision, uncertainty, doubt. Each shimmer on its surface reflected not his face, but what his mind was trying to hide. A voice unbodied, genderless, and ancient emerged from the walls. The test of mirror thought has begun. All laws of ego are suspended. You may not lie here, even to yourself. He took one step forward, and the air thickened. One more, and time began to lag. With every movement, the sphere shifted its reflection. Not backward, not forward, but inward. When he finally reached it, a seam opened along its surface, revealing a flash of light that poured into his pupils, burning past retina, past memory, past will. Then everything disappeared. He stood in a council room, Earth's old UN dome, crumbling from age and war. Around him, men and women in suits argued about planetary defense. No one noticed him. No one even saw him. And at the center of the room stood a man he vaguely recognized. Not from life, but from the archives. A man named Chancellor Redon, a leader from a century ago, famous for ending the AI rebellion. He had been a savior in history books. But now Logan saw the truth. The image warped. A secret chamber beneath the council. Redon alone, face buried in his hands, weeping. And on the table before him, 2 files. File A, release a truth: an AI faction had been peaceful, willing to negotiate, their massacre unjust. Choosing this meant loss of global support, risk of Earth losing sovereignty. File B, cover it up, frame the event as pure aggression. Earth would rally. Resources would flow. Unity, through blood. Redon had chosen File B. Logan watched him, alone, as he whispered, "Forgive me," before sealing the truth forever. Then the mirror shattered. Now he stood in a canyon. The sky was black. Not night, just void. A voice whispered in his ear, not from outside, but from the part of his mind that doubted. If given power, would you become him? Before him, 4 paths. 4 versions of himself. One held a blade over a chained alien, sacrificing her to secure Earth's future. One stood surrounded by knowledge scrolls of universal truth, but his eyes were blind. One wore a crown, a planet kneeling at his feet, but no warmth remained in his soul. The 4th was alone. No power, no reward, but hands stained with sacrifice, lips cracked from silence, yet eyes still soft. The mirror appeared again. Choose. The air began to vibrate. Pain gripped the back of his skull like someone peeling layers of his identity apart. Not pain of the body, but of the core. Memories flickered: his mother's voice, a child's laughter, the feeling of being forgotten. Words formed in his mouth without his will. There's a 5th path. You just don't want me to see it? The trial fought back. Gravity collapsed, and his thoughts began to fragment. He saw each of the princesses not as they were, but as they might become. Serena, turned tyrant, using her art to seduce minds into blind obedience. Tyria, leading rebel fleets across galaxies, burning empires for vengeance. Zareth, the warrior, one dead in a crater, her mind broken by loyalty to no cause. And the eldest, ruling alone, frozen by fear of betrayal, turning into her father's mirror. Then the voice, cold, desperate. Would you save Earth by betraying one of them? His legs buckled. Would you sacrifice a single soul, to guarantee 1,000 years of peace? He screamed, not out loud, but inward, a scream that clawed at the cage around his integrity. And in that agony, he remembered his grandfather, not standing proud in legend but in silence, walking away from power, knowing no one would ever know what he gave up. He whispered, "Peace built on betrayal, isn't peace. It's a ceasefire with a timer." The chamber exploded. But instead of sound, it burst into clarity. The trial dissolved. The paths vanished. The pain stopped. He was back in the chamber, but the sphere had changed. It no longer shimmered like quicksilver. It had turned to glass, transparent, reflecting not the past, not the future, but the present. His face. The voice returned, but this time it sounded respectful. He has passed. Not by force, not by cleverness, but by remembering who he is. And from beyond the veil, for just a flicker of a second, he felt something watching, something deeper than the trial itself. A presence behind the test. Not machine, not alien, but intent. Something, or someone, had designed this test not to break him, but to see if he could refuse power when it came wrapped in justification. Because that was what they had forgotten. That humanity's greatest strength was not its science, not its wars, not its logic. It was the refusal to become what others expect, when those expectations compromise the soul. The chamber they led him into did not feel like a room. It felt like a thought left behind by something ancient. There were no walls, only haze, swirling like ink in still water. The floor beneath his steps gave no sound, yet shifted subtly, as though adapting not to mass, but to memory. At its center stood a circle of 13 blades, none drawn, none stained, none forged of metal. They hovered, silent, weightless, suspended above a polished stone disc engraved with fractal sigils that rearranged themselves depending on where he stood. There was no weapon to wield, no opponent to defeat. Because this was the trial of the heart, and in this hall, the only blade that cuts is choice. The voice that greeted him was not the same as before. It was softer. Not warm, but less cold. Female, perhaps. Or simply more interested. Emotion fractures logic. Pain decays clarity. Let us test the purity of your heart. Let us peel the soul from the story you tell yourself. And without waiting for him to answer, the air cracked and the chamber filled with his past. A child, screaming under collapsing steel beams in a mining colony on Europa. A brother's hand slipping from his grip into the void of a broken airlock. The red lights of a failed emergency system blinking like judgment. A woman's voice, soft, calling his name as she dissolved into static on an outbound transmission never reaching Earth again. But he did not scream. The air changed again. He stood now in a ship's cockpit. Not his. Not memory. Someone else's. A man's voice spoke, gravelly, exhausted. He was reading a message on a cracked data pad. You're not a hero for choosing Earth, Ray. You're a murderer of love. And that will never go away. Through the window, a fleet of refugee ships entering jump drive. Safe. Behind him, a single cry. A body drifting away, his wife unstrapped, left behind during the manual override. The pilot had saved 4 million colonists, but let his own wife die to do it. The mirror of the blades pulsed softly. Logan felt the memory press into his skull. He had read about Ray Strennan, the Earth pilot who later vanished in exile, refusing all medals. He was called a coward by some, a savior by others. But in this moment, Logan didn't see a title. He saw truth. Sacrifice is not noble. It is wretched. It is quiet. It is what's left after all stories stop. He stood still, staring at the circle of 13 blades. Each one now had a single memory flickering at its edge, his, or Ray's, or someone else's. The voices in the fog whispered. Pick one. Just one. The one memory you would trade, erase, or twist to change what came next. No lies. Only cost. But that was the trick, wasn't it? To erase pain is to erase the shape of the soul. He did not move. One of the blades floated toward him anyway, unbidden, unchosen. It hovered inches from his chest, gleaming not with light, but with hesitation. In its reflection, he saw her. Zareth. The third princess. Watching from the edge of the trial, her eyes not narrow with disdain, not poised like a predator but wide. Uncertain. Something in this moment had cracked through her armor. The trial was meant for him, but the echo of what she saw was also breaking into her. She saw a man who refused power in the mirror trial. Now she saw a man who refused forgetting in the trial of the heart. Zareth, born for strategy, for dominance, for the optimization of loss, was watching someone choose to remember. A flaw in her logic. A virus in her worldview. And it shook her. Her steps drew closer to the blade circle, even though no one invited her in. The rules of the test didn't apply to her. She wasn't supposed to feel this. But she had to see, had to understand what kind of creature could stand there, surrounded by ghosts and regret and impossible judgment, and not ask to be spared. And Logan, without turning, spoke not to the trial, but to her. I saw you in the last vision, he said. Dead. Alone. A blade still in your hand. Fighting for something that didn't even know your name. Zareth tensed. He continued. You were a perfect tactician. You never broke. Never cried. Never compromised. And you died, for nothing. Silence. Then he turned slowly and looked directly at her. His voice was calm. Not accusing. Just present. You don't have to end that way. She didn't answer. But her fingers flexed. The light around her flickered. For a second, her image shimmered unstable, not because of weakness, but because a truth long buried had begun to surface. Something in her posture softened. Her eyes, always calculating, now reflected question. Not about him. About herself. And the trial, sensing the moment, faded. The blades fell one by one, clinking softly onto the stone floor like ceremonial offerings. The chamber dimmed. And the voice returned, not with judgment, but with something close to reverence. He carries grief without vengeance. Pain without performance. He has bled, but does not bleed others. This heart is unarmored and stronger for it. As the haze faded, Zareth stood frozen. Her breath shallow. Logan walked past her, not expecting anything. Not waiting. But as he passed, her hand reached out, barely brushing his wrist. Just a whisper of contact. Enough to say, "I saw you." And that was the first time she had touched anyone without control. The garden had no sky. Only a living dome of translucent petals drifting like breath suspended in time. Each leaf pulsed gently, absorbing moonlight from 3 satellites orbiting the palace. The trees did not grow upward but outward, with branches coiling like spirals of memory, leaves flickering with subtle shifts of temperature and intent. Beneath their roots were veins of glowing crystal, murmuring not water, but thoughts, resonance fragments that stored conversations long past. This was not just a sanctuary. It was a recorder of truths. He wandered alone at first. The aftermath of the trial had drained him in ways he couldn't explain. The echoes of Raestrenan's sacrifice, Zareth's brief touch, and his own refusal to forget had left a pulse within him, a quiet, humming ache, like an unfinished chord. He sat beside a pond where the surface reflected not the sky but possibility. In it, he did not see his face but flickers of what he could become. Footsteps approached, not hurried, not ceremonial. They were deliberate, hesitant. When he turned, Tiara stood at the edge of the path. No guards. No cloak of royal defiance. Just her. Bare shoulders glinting under the strange moonlight, hair unbraided, eyes shifting between challenge and unease. "You shouldn't be alone," she said without preamble. He raised an eyebrow. "Worried someone might try to kill me." "Worried someone might succeed," she muttered, almost too low for the garden to hear. He stood. "That's progress." She looked away, scanning the treetops, her voice hard again. "They won't strike in the open. Not yet. But this place, it hides too much." "Like what?" he asked, watching her more than the garden. Tiara turned slowly. "Loyalty. Secrets. Bloodlines that rot from within while singing hymns of honor. My sisters don't see it, but I do. Father's legacy is cracked, and the ones who smile most brightly are the ones sharpening blades behind their backs." "And you?" he asked. She didn't answer. Instead, she walked past him, toward a glade wrapped in spiraled stone vines. There, beneath a canopy of violet roots, sat a memory pillar, one of the oldest parts of the garden. She placed her palm on its surface. It lit up, revealing whispers of past conversations etched in holographic echoes. "Watch," she said. A projection flickered to life. 2 figures. Royal guards. Whispering. The youngest still questions the inheritance. "If we move now, we can pin the incident on her. And the Earthborn. He won't last." He's just a symbol. A delay tactic. The real decisions come after. The memory cut. Logan stepped closer. They're planning to frame you. I know, she said, voice suddenly smaller. They think I'm weak. Because I speak out. Because I don't play politics like my sisters. Because she stopped herself. He waited. Tiara looked up, not at him, but at the darkness above the garden dome. When I was younger, I used to dream of Earth. Not because it was beautiful, our records said it was broken, chaotic. But because you felt things, differently. Deeply. My tutors said it made humans dangerous. Soft minds. Unfiltered emotion. Not efficient. She glanced at him now, sharp. But they never said you fought with it. That you made pain into principle. That you bled for meaning. I thought that was myth. But you stood in that hall, and you didn't flinch. Not even when it offered you erasure. He approached slowly. And now I think, her voice cracked slightly, then recovered. Now I think maybe your soul wasn't a glitch in the bloodline. Maybe it was the key Father saw when none of us did. She stepped away from the pillar, but her shoulders tensed. They'll move soon. I can feel it. Tonight, perhaps. The glades are too quiet. The resonance stones aren't humming in the right tone. He frowned. You can hear that? Tiara nodded. I was born attuned to microharmonics. It's why I hate the throne rooms too polished. Too perfect. But here, things slip. And what I'm hearing now, is silence where there should be memory. A sudden pulse broke through the stillness. The pond's surface shivered. From the far end of the garden, a shape moved. Not walking. Gliding. Its skin shimmered like cloaked crystal, adaptive camouflage stolen from House Kareth. Eyes like polished obsidian. And in its hand, a dagger made not of steel, but condensed phase disruption capable of unmaking nerve systems before pain could register. Tiara didn't scream. She reached for Logan's arm and shoved him back just as the dagger sliced through the air where his chest had been. He rolled, landed on his side, and came up to see her fighting. Not as a princess, but as someone who had prepared. She danced between roots, using the garden's natural weave as misdirection. The assassin struck again. And this time Logan moved. No weapons. Just instinct. He grabbed a resonance shard from the pond's edge, barely the length of his forearm, and hurled it with all the force he had. It didn't hit the target, but it sang mid-air, disrupting the cloak's alignment. The assassin flickered, became visible just long enough for Tiara to lunge. She didn't stab him. She touched his pressure point. The body fell. Not dead, immobilized. And then another pulse. Not one. 3. Shapes emerging from behind trees. The attack wasn't about assassination. It was extraction. They were trying to take him. Run, she shouted, already moving again. But he didn't. He turned to the memory pillar, slammed his hand against it, and yelled, "Record everything." Then the garden exploded in blue. Guards swarmed in seconds later, summoned by the alarm Logan had triggered. But the assassins were already vanishing, back into the cracks between legacy and betrayal. In the aftermath, Tiara sat beside him again. Blood on her sleeve. Her expression unreadable. "I used to think your species didn't have souls," she said quietly. "Now I think maybe, ours are the ones that went quiet." He met her eyes. "Then let's make them remember." The suns of Elerya never set at once. Instead, they folded across the horizon in staggered waves, painting the capital with bands of gold, violet, and iridescent gray. Underneath their light, the palace's atrium transformed walls of translucent stone breathing slowly, adjusting their hue to match the mood of the hour. Suspended gardens lowered their roots to kiss the walkways. Music not played, but generated by harmonic shifts in magnetic arches filled the space like a whisper that knew every memory you had ever buried. That evening, the palace hosted no banquet, no ceremony. The great halls remained silent. And yet, in the hall of echoing threads, Logan stood alone beneath a lattice of stardust-colored drapes, a small orb in his palm, a music seed from old Earth. He activated it with a soft pulse. A crackling began. Primitive, imperfect. Then the melody unfolded, low, soulful jazz from pre-collapse Chicago. A sound that had once been background noise for rooftop lovers and distant regrets. He didn't notice he was being watched. Serena had entered without announcement. Draped in silver-white linens that caught the light like a memory half remembered, she moved without sound. But when the music reached her, she stopped. "What is that?" she asked, her voice the softest it had ever been. "Earth," he said. "Before it learned how to burn itself from the inside out." She stepped closer. "It's unstructured." He smiled. "It's not meant to control emotion. It's meant to catch it, mid-fall." Serena tilted her head. "We don't dance like that. You don't have to. Just feel." He extended a hand. She didn't take it at first. Just stared. Then, curious, she set aside the crystal stylus she'd been holding, the same one she used to sketch emotions she couldn't name, and placed her palm in his. The touch was cautious. Not fragile, precise. Like someone trying to hold an idea for the first time without breaking it. They began to move not rhythmically, but relationally. She followed the way his steps led her into asymmetry, imperfection, freedom. At first, her movements resisted. Then, they relaxed. Melted. Shifted. "I always thought human art was chaotic," she whispered. "But maybe, it's honest." He didn't answer. He only guided her into another slow turn. Around them, the walls began to change, not into images, but into colors that reflected intention. Serena's aura pulsed gold red. Logan's, a deep azure. When their shadows touched, the patterns converged, spiraling into abstract glyphs. She leaned in. "Do you know what these walls are doing?" "No." "They're recording us." She looked up at him, and in that moment, her composure broke, not in a collapse, but in a bloom. Hours later, he found her again. This time, not in a dance hall, but in her hidden studio beneath the east wing, where the walls didn't listen and the air held the smell of pigment dust and dry memory. She sat before a translucent canvas, her fingers glowing with kinetic ink, eyes locked onto a half-finished painting of a world she had never touched. It was Earth. But not Earth as it was. Earth as it felt. A wave crashing into a broken pier. A child's face in silhouette beneath shattered street lamps. Stars blurred by humidity and regret. She had never set foot there, and yet, the emotion was flawless. He stepped beside her without speaking. Serena's voice was distant. "I wasn't supposed to paint anymore. It was deemed inefficient. Sentimentality impairs perception." "But you're still doing it," he said. She shook her head slowly. "I stopped years ago. This piece came back after the second trial. After the garden. After seeing you bleed truth. He studied the strokes. I think you paint what we can't say. She looked at him, eyes heavy with galaxies. And you say what we're afraid to feel. Sometime later, under the twin crescents of the outer moons, he told her the story. Not a myth. Not a metaphor. Just a file that never made it into the official archives. In 2171, during first contact operations with the Aurelus Enclave, a human pilot named Aaron Hay had been assigned to a negotiation pod. The mission failed within the first hour. Linguistic misfires. Symbolic errors. Hostile silence. Until one moment unrecorded when Aaron, frustrated and sleep-deprived, accidentally activated his personal music file inside the chamber. An old Earth lullaby played. The alien delegate, later identified as a high empathy, paused. Turned. Then, after several minutes, released a sound unlike anything recorded before, not mimicry. Not syntax. But laughter. The first audible laugh between two species. It wasn't joyful. It was reflective. Relieved. From that point on, the negotiation resumed. Hay later wrote in a private note, they didn't understand our language. But they understood the feeling behind an off-key human hum. That was the first bridge. Serena said nothing for a long time. Then she placed her hand atop his. I used to think art was for the weak. That feeling was a form of malfunction. But maybe, it's what makes us compatible. He didn't reply. There was no need. Because under those alien suns, surrounded by forgotten chambers and symphonies of memory, something unspoken passed between them. And neither of them felt alone anymore. The first breach wasn't loud. It was out of tune. A single harmonic shiver passed through the palace walls, barely perceptible to the ear but violently wrong to the memory stones embedded within them. The walls, built to resonate with thought and intention, began to skip like a fractured song. Lights flickered not from power loss but from confusion. Systems designed to think in symphony now muttered in dissonance. He felt it first in his teeth. A pressure. A throb behind the eyes. Zareth was the first to draw a weapon not out of fear, but training. She activated a curved disc from her wrist, unfolding into a blade forged of heat-locked chinix. We're under resonance interference, she growled. This is no accident. Serena froze mid-brush stroke, the color in her hands still glowing, unfinished. Someone's overwritten the palace's collective memory field. It's not just corruption, Logan said, eyes narrowing. It's a targeted collapse. They're trying to make the palace forget how to protect itself. From the North Tower, a pulse rippled outward like a thought trying to scream through fog. Glass structures twisted, not physically, but informationally. Shapes unraveled. Pathways moved. Geometry betrayed its purpose. Then came the breach proper. A tear opened in the sky dome, a controlled distortion, folded from within. Shadows poured through, wrapped in phase cloaks that blinked faster than the eye could anchor. Not soldiers. Not machines. Interrupters. Biological agents bred to destabilize belief-based infrastructure. They didn't shoot. They sang. A discordant waveform that struck like a virus through the air, eroding loyalty, shaking trust. Guards dropped their weapons. Drones froze mid-hover. Even some of the princess's elite protectors stared, lost in inner tremor. But Logan didn't flinch. Because what the attackers had miscalculated, was that he wasn't trying to defend the palace. He was trying to reteach it. He sprinted toward the central core located beneath the archives, a place where no alien had ever stepped without centuries of encoded access. But the palace didn't reject him. It hesitated. He placed his hand against the crystalline console. "You're confused," he whispered. "You've been poisoned by contradiction. But you remember something older than programming. You remember what my grandfather taught you." He focused not on commands, but on stories. On moments. He remembered Serena's brush still glowing in the moonlight. Zaratha's hand bleeding beside a fallen guard. Tiara's voice, ragged with conviction as she stepped into the garden's path. And Alice, the eldest, watching, always watching, not cold, but burdened, trying to carry their father's dream alone. And then, like a sudden breath held too long, the system recognized him. Not as heir. Not as consort. As a narrative anchor. The palace surged. He slammed his fist into the core interface. "Sing with me." The memory stones resonated. Walls realigned. The shattered corridors stitched themselves back together, not through matter, but through shared meaning. Shields erupted not from generators but from recognition. A shimmering dome enveloped the main structure, pulsing not with frequency but with trust. Zarath, watching from the western defense post, hissed into the comms. "What did you do?" Logan's voice crackled back, "Taught it a new story." The attackers recoiled. Their waveform began to falter. Harmony emergent, improvised, bled into the battlefield. Serena projected a sequence of living art through the open towers, symbols of resistance flickering across the sky like a new myth being born in real time. And then, the palace began to fight back. The roots of the structure, previously passive, unfolded from the ground like luminous tendrils, weaving around the interrupters, binding them not in force but in confusion. They couldn't anchor their reality in this space anymore. The very code of the building rejected them like a body rejecting a bad memory. Within minutes, the siege broke. But the cost had been revelation. The data Logan pulled from the corrupted buffer logs told the truth: the attack had been invited. Key access markers linked directly to House Vihalen, the High Council family that had once stood beside the old king, and had now turned against his legacy. Not for power, but for purity. They believed the merging of human and Elerion paths was a dilution, a contamination. And they would rather see the kingdom collapse than evolve. In the aftermath, Logan stood on the outer ramparts beside Alice. The eldest princess didn't speak for a long time. The wind carried the scent of scorched crystal and ozone. Finally, she turned to him. "You built a shield out of belief." He nodded. "Not mine. Yours. Serena's. Tiara's. Even Zaratha's hesitation. I didn't create it. I just reminded the system of the people it was supposed to protect." She stared at the horizon, where fragments of the sky dome still flickered uncertainly. "This wasn't an isolated coup." "No," he said. "But now we know who the architects are. And they know who we've become," she murmured. He turned to her. "Then let them know what we believe." For the first time, she didn't correct his use of we. The chamber knew him before he arrived. Its walls shimmered not with light, but with intention, shifting in ripples of unfinished memories, taking shapes that matched neither geometry nor dream. There was no door. Only passage. No beginning. Only recognition. As he stepped into its center, the air didn't resist him, it accepted him, like a wound remembering the blade. A single pillar rose from the void, made of mirrored obsidian. Upon it, a sphere of unlit glass, cold, silent, inert. but around it, the space pulsed with fractured echoes, whispers of timelines that had never happened, faces that never were, wounds that had not yet bled. This was not a test of strength. It was a confrontation with the version of himself that could have been and still might become. He placed his hand on the sphere. The mirror cracked not in the glass, but in the space around him. Reality folded inward. The chamber peeled back. And he saw himself. Not reflected. Not imitated. But manifested. A figure emerged, his face, his posture, but not his soul. Eyes dim with calculation. Mouth taut with authority. A version of him who had embraced the throne not as burden but as weapon. This was the king who ruled not through alliance, but through certainty. The one who had seen weakness in feeling, distraction in connection. The one who had won the respect of the houses by silencing their opposition. He was not cruel. He was efficient. And now, he watched the real Logan with calm curiosity. So, the mirror self said, stepping closer. You're the version they chose. The one who hesitates. Who bleeds over poetry and paints instead of drawing lines in stone. Logan didn't answer. I've already run the numbers, the figure continued. Empathy costs territory. Mercy invites betrayal. Love, even in its purest form, breeds vulnerability. We both know how this ends, don't we? He gestured, and the walls responded. Scenes bloomed around them, possible outcomes. 1. Serena, executed by her own council for siding with a human. 2. Tierra, hunted across galaxies as a traitor to her bloodline. 3. Alice, assassinated in the name of restoring purity. 4. Zerath, dying with a blade in her chest, alone, misunderstood, loyal to the end. All consequences of his choices. Stop, Logan said, his voice low. No, the mirror answered. You need to see. Because I made the other choice. I chose control. Isolation. Clarity. And in return I preserved the kingdom. The council bowed. The houses unified. Earth rose. No one died who didn't need to. Logan stepped closer. But you were alone. The mirror smiled faintly. Alone, but undefeated. Silence stretched. Then a soft sound interrupted it. Not from the mirror. From behind the veil of light to the left, an echo not part of this test, but permitted to bleed in. A memory. No, a story. A voice, female, hard, ancient. He was my father. And I killed him. The voice belonged to Midrovex, the alien warrior Logan had once studied in silence. A historical ghost. The one who had ended the civil war on the planet Kenal by executing her own progenitor, the High General Vexer, when he betrayed the planetary pact for personal gain. She did it without hatred. Without triumph. She did it because no one else would. And after the war was won, she never returned to command. Never spoke in council again. She disappeared. Her story ended not in legacy but in silence. Not because she failed. But because she refused to let victory define her. The memory faded. And the mirror self finally frowned. You think sacrifice means surrender? No, Logan said. I think sacrifice without memory becomes vanity. And victory without soul becomes rot. He took one step forward. The space cracked under his foot like frozen conscience. I won't destroy you, he said quietly. Because you're part of me. But I won't become you. The mirror self watched him for a long moment. Then, nodded. And stepped back into the sphere. No struggle. No collapse. Just acceptance. The sphere pulsed once. Its surface turned white. Not glowing, but clear. The test had ended not by conquest, not by performance, but by refusal to become what survival demanded. Outside the chamber, the resonance towers of the palace lit one by one, transmitting not orders, not data, but an encoded memory of choice. It spread like starlight. It hummed like truth. A ripple passed through the inner council, through the houses, through the dissenters and the loyal alike. A new symbol appeared in the skies above Elerya, not a crest of conquest, but the echo of a decision. That some empires are worth less than the people inside them. The chamber was not a room. It was a system. Floating above the star cradle of Horus Zero, the assembly dome stretched beyond architecture into cosmology. Dozens of planetary delegations hovered on fractal platforms that rotated around a central well of light, each species manifesting its presence not in flesh alone, but in spectral projection, harmonic imprint, psychic bloom. Some had no shape at all. Some were song. Some were mist. Some were thought, riding the neural lattice of a biomechanical brain grown from moonstone. Each seat was known as an eye. Not a metaphor. The council of 1,000 eyes was built to see, not just decide. To reflect the will of a galaxy through witnessing. And now, at the axis of it all, the 5 figures stood: 4 princesses of alien lineage, and 1 man born from a world once declared irrelevant. There were no guards. No introductions. Only silence. Until the central eye pulsed. A voice emerged not from throat, but from consensus. Elerya submits a motion for evolutionary variance. State your case. Allah stepped forward. Her robe was black, not with mourning, but with declaration threaded in the mathematical glyphs of balance. Her voice was measured. Elerya has not fallen. But we have broken the cycle. What we present is not a deviation. It is an expansion. The council did not reply. It listened. The light above them narrowed into a single beam focused entirely on the Earthborn. Logan stepped forward. He did not wear armor. Or a crown. He wore the robes of a memory keeper, gray, rough, lined in forgotten fabric from the outer rings of soul. And when he spoke, his voice carried not through force but through story. I am not here to defend myself, he said calmly. I am here because a galaxy that claims to embrace wisdom cannot fear its own evolution. He paused. You have seen humans as unstable, primitive, prone to war, contradiction, collapse. And you are not wrong. We are those things. A ripple passed through the council. Truth always created discomfort. But we are also the species that walked through radiation and still reached for the stars. The ones who burned their own sky, then learned how to regrow food in darkness. Who lost cities to oceans and still wrote songs to remember their names. He gestured to the princesses behind him, each standing not behind, but beside. They chose to give me trust not because I was powerful, but because I could fail. Because I knew what failure meant. Then he told them a story. Of Amariel, the first Eleryan pilot who crash-landed on Mars and would have died in an oxygen fire had she not been dragged from her wreckage by a teenage human engineer named Elon Chen, who stayed with her, breath by breath, ration by ration, even as his lungs burned. She survived. He didn't. She went on to rewrite Eleryan medical doctrine to include the value of pain endurance. His name had never been mentioned in their records until today. Then he told another. Of Marla Vex, a diplomat from the Harkany spiral, who declared Earth irrelevant after the Soul riots but who secretly returned years later to study Earth's poetry, saying in her final speech, "We fear what we cannot reduce. And humans are, by definition, irreducible." And then, his voice quieted. "I'm not asking for your approval. I'm asking you to acknowledge that unity is not born from fear but from choice. And choice only has value when risk is real." The chamber dimmed. One by one, the eyes began to turn not toward the human but toward the four daughters of Elia. Zarath, with her arms folded, eyes gleaming with tension. Tiara, fingers twitching, heart exposed for once without rebellion. Serena, calm, luminous, holding a pulse of color that only she could see. And Alice, watching everything, holding it together not through command but presence. Then the final question was posed. Does Elia stand united in this proposal? The princesses turned inward. No words passed. Only gaze. And then Alice nodded. Together, they stepped forward. "We do." The vote began. Each species projected their glyph into the dome's core symbols of refusal, approval, abstention. The count shimmered across bands of light language that bypassed language. At first, split. Then, shift. Then, rise. And when the last eye blinked into resonance, motion passed. But it wasn't the tally that mattered. It was what came after. From one of the upper tiers, a being rose formless, voice a series of cascading harmonic chords. It spoke only once. "Let it be known. Evolution now bears human fingerprint." The coronation chamber was not designed by hands. It was grown over centuries, layer by layer, from the dreams of four civilizations braided into one biomechanical core. The ceiling shifted like the inside of a nebula, showing moments that had not yet happened. The floor pulsed with memory resonance, reflecting not the presence of those within but their intentions. This place did not crown monarchs. It recorded agreements of meaning. Four princesses stood at cardinal points of the chamber, each bearing the sigil of their house, one formed from crystal logic, one from harmonic emotion, one from tactical geometry, and one from discordant flame. They wore no crowns. They were the crowns. And in the center stood him. No longer unknown. No longer outsider. Not ruler. Not symbol. He was now bridge. Between biologies. Between thought forms. Between memory structures. Between what was, and what might be possible. The ritual began not with words, but with gaze. Each sister stepped forward not to kneel, not to bow but to offer a strand of sovereignty. Zarath extended her blade, point downward. Serena, a drop of color suspended in air. Tiara, a pulse of resonance extracted from her spinal node. Alice, a silence so dense it bent time for a second. He received them not as artifacts, but as trust and fused them into a lattice of light that rose around him, not to protect but to connect. The crowd was not a crowd. It was the galaxy. Projected presences, avatars of systems across spiral arms and border worlds, watched without blinking. The Earthborn was now visible to every witness who had once called his kind insignificant. He spoke only once. "This is not a coronation. This is a crossroad." And the lattice pulsed. The chamber changed. No longer a structure. It became a pattern. A configuration of four systems entering mutual resonance not through treaty, not through fear but through voluntary vulnerability. Every alliance before had been sealed with weapon parity. This one was sealed with emotional synchronization, a phenomenon once thought impossible between species with incompatible neural frameworks. But here, before the thousand eyes of the galactic quorum, a new concept had been seeded. Coherence without conquest. Logan didn't ascend a throne. He sat on a low platform, arms open, grounded not elevated. And one by one, the four daughters of Elerya joined him. Not behind. Not beneath. Beside. And the resonance pillar recorded their harmonics syncing across core consciousness fields, planetary memory banks, and myth transmission protocols. The assembly no longer watched in debate. It watched in stillness. Because something had happened that no AI, no seer, no oracle had predicted. A system had chosen to unify not by dominance, but by mutual imperfection. In the hours that followed, after the harmonics faded and the projections blinked out, the five sat alone in the twilight chamber. No advisors. No holograms. Just a man, and four souls who had once called him an accident. Serena rested her head against his shoulder, humming a new melody. Zareth leaned against the pillar, blade finally sheathed. Tiara sat cross-legged, muttering that this didn't make her soft, just statistically adaptable. Alice stood last, watching the stars realign in slow procession. "Do you think they'll remember this?" he asked. Alice answered without turning. "Not at first. The systems will resist. Old paths always echo. But eventually, someone will point to this day, and say that's where the shift began." He smiled. "You still don't believe in fate?" "I believe in timing," she said. "And yours was impossible to design." And far beyond the palace, in the outer rings of the Inna cluster, a colony child stared up at the transmitted image of the lattice crowning not a monarch, but a bridge. And whispered to her mother, "That's the one. The one who made the princesses choose." And her mother said, "He made them choose truth." The lesson did not come in proclamation. It came in how they walked out together. Not because biology aligned. Not because politics demanded. But because they believed that cooperation is not the absence of conflict, but the decision to make meaning out of it. That love, at its highest form, is not instinct or species but the courage to not run when understanding hurts. And that the future, belongs not to the most powerful, but to those who trust the fragile, uncertain shape of connection. So, from exile to emblem, from mistake to meaning, this is the journey of a man who was never supposed to matter, yet became the bridge between species, minds, and hearts. Four alien princesses once believed humans lack soul. But in standing beside him in trials of thought, bloodless blades, and broken mirrors, they discovered not weakness, but resonance. And you, yes, you have followed that resonance all the way here. Now tell me, Ringed Planet, what part of this journey struck you most deeply? Thought Balloon, which trial would you have failed or passed? Broken Heart, would you have chosen love over duty, or the galaxy over one life? Drop your thoughts below, your questions, your what ifs, your favorite scenes. Let's keep this story alive through conversation. And if you believe that stories like this matter, stories of connection beyond stars, of fragile hope stronger than protocol, then don't forget to subscribe to the Alien Storyverse. Because this galaxy is only just beginning.